Chapter 41. Becoming Air-Minded. The fact that New York City had much of the world's gold in its cash drawer by 1920 added somewhat to the perils of its Reconstruction period. High wartime wages had encouraged men to live extravagantly, and personal speculation began to take much of the capital that had been devoted before in a more direct way to the expansion of business. The same unrest that made royalties and other distinguished persons come in greater numbers than ever to visit New York now that peace had returned, stirred through every class of society. While New York offered its freedom in turn to the royal family of Belgium, to Marshal Foch and Prince Eudes of Denmark, and even permitted the Prince of Wales to hang on a subway strap, something very near anarchy showed its ugly head about the city. There had been war profiteering, and there continued to be construction graft. The cost of living soared higher and higher to bring more discontent. In spite of working on public improvements like the Queensboro Subway Tunnel, the Bronx River Parkway, the Broadway-Brighton Subway Extension, and many other rapid transit developments, there was unemployment, and many rumors of red plots filled the air. Then, on September 16th, 1920, the most serious bomb explosion in the city's history occurred in front of the U.S. Assay Office near the corner of Broad and Wall Streets, in which 33 persons were killed and more than 300 were wounded. The explosives had been conveyed to the spot in a one-horse truck and set off at noon, blowing the horse and vehicle to atoms, shattering windows, hurling bits of masonry through the air, and strewing the pavement with dead and dying. The horror of this outrage, which many were ready to blame on the discontent that was drifting over from unhappy Northern Europe, made the national law restricting immigration doubly welcome to New York. And the importance of this regulation can hardly be overestimated, providing, as it does, a chance for the city to catch up a bit with its ingredients. In 1921, the same year in which this law was passed, a treaty between New York and New Jersey, the result of a Port and Harbor Commission appointed in 1917, created a Port Authority Board, whose plans for development were promptly approved by the state and federal officials. The port projects are courageous and far-seeing, worthy of the great gateway through which pass 50% of the country's imports and 40% of its exports. They call for the establishment of 9 vast terminal freight stations in Manhattan, the development of Jamaica Bay for ocean ships, and for many other great improvements. Clemenceau was the city's guest in 1922, and in Brooklyn was greeted by 300,000 schoolchildren, while Paderewski came back to the concert stage in Carnegie Hall, rejoining the ranks of those world-famous professional artists in all branches who in greater numbers each year make their homes in New York. In return for larger audiences and salaries than they can command elsewhere, they have given to the city full measure in setting a high standard of artistic taste. Andrew Green's dream of a greater city must have been far surpassed on May 26, 1923, when New York opened its Silver Jubilee in the Grand Central Palace. The city, however, was still at its old work of tearing down and rebuilding. The first bronze signal towers for traffic on Fifth Avenue had been unveiled almost at the moment a brass band was rehearsing for the ceremony of demolishing the outworn elevated tracks on Upper Sixth Avenue. If there could have been a kind of super-speed movie projection, like those occasional pictures of the opening of a flower, it would have shown the solid brick, stone, and steel of the great city flowing into new forms with every moment. Buildings and even districts would have seemed to melt away as they were being magically displaced by greater structures. In 1924, barely 3 centuries since a few huts had sheltered the beginnings of fur trade on Manhattan Island, the inhabitants of Greater New York were receiving visitors by air. The American-built NC-4 had made its momentous first transatlantic flight from New York to Plymouth, England, and other crossings had followed. In turn, Alcock and Brown, completing the first non-stop flight from England to America, the United States Army round-the-world flyers, and the German dirigible, the ZR-3, from Friedrichshafen, had alighted to pay their respects to New York City. One might think that a city accustomed from its earliest infancy to parades, demonstrations, and the welcoming of heroes would in time grow blasé, but enthusiasm has never ceased to be the spontaneous expression of New York, where the majority of the population is between the ages of 20 and 40. It is a city of youth. On June 13th, 1927, when Captain Charles A. Lindbergh, United States Air Mail pilot, came back from his remarkable solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, there was nothing missing from the reception accorded him, in the avalanche of ticker tape or in the shouting. An escort of 10,000 soldiers preceded him up from the battery. 750,000 pounds of torn paper fluttered to the streets, and overhead 75 airplanes whirred and swooped and wheeled. To him went the first great overwhelming welcome for his marvelous feat in aviation, and those who have since followed his daring example have had no cause to complain about the warmth of their greeting. It would be strange indeed if a city that literally spends so much on its life hundreds of feet above the earth level were not to a high degree air-minded. After all, New York may well be characterized as air-minded in the sense that no limits are set upon its dreams. Tendencies there are, to be sure, one tendency expressed by the Holland Vehicular Tunnel under the Hudson, completed in 1927, the great Fort Lee Bridge that will span the same river in 1932, in the dedication of the vast medical center uptown, the plans for no less than 4 new bridges to connect the boroughs to each other and to New Jersey, in prospective tunnels that will serve the same purpose and to further speed up vehicular traffic lengthwise in Manhattan. All these and many other projects underscore the tendency of New York toward greater permanence of construction. In the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, soon to be completed as the 3rd largest religious edifice in the world, in the new Temple Emanu-El, the skyscraper church, and most definitely in the proposed plan for a great metropolitan opera house center, the city shows a conscious growth toward beauty. There is, moreover, a tendency toward greater preservation of the city's relics of the past. A museum of the city of New York, the first institution of its kind in any American city, will be completed in the early 1930s, and by reason of a $100,000 gift from the Altman Foundation, will contain a gallery dedicated wholly to Fifth Avenue, that street up which more famous personages have marched to glory than have done so on any other thoroughfare. New York's progress from such a recent past to such an amazing present invites, at least, a guess at its prodigious future.